you should be in, and I'll just pull it up here, is the Careers Exploration. So if that's not your session, then you may be confused. And a couple ground rules. Obviously, we have a code of ethics, so we've got to keep it within the ESA code of ethics. And we're a pretty small group, so we don't need to do a lot of hand raising. So you can unmute yourself if you have a question, so we can keep it relatively fluid and pretty easy. I'm sharing just a couple screens here in terms of a slideshow, which basically outlines a couple of pieces for ESA in terms of code of conduct, but that's just for an intro. So I guess this is really the Q&A portion to the careers exploration, where there were about 5 or 6 different career paths that were presented, and I'll open it up to the group in terms of questions individuals have with regard to that career exploration, and others can answer it in our meeting here. So I'll turn off the share.
I have a question, kind of specifically for Karen. As a professor of conservation biology and doing research and doing service, how much do you feel like you are making action changes in your communities, or we're actually making conservation progress, as opposed to teaching and science, contributing to scientific knowledge, and the balance of that? Because I'm interested in conservation, but I want to make sure that the career path I choose allows me to be making hands-on changes and contributions.
That's a great question. My first answer is we don't always know the impact we have. And so I do have a multiplier effect because of the number of students I interact with, that I will never know the full extent of the impact I've had. In practical terms, I have worked with government biologists and nonprofit biologists in Canada and the US, and I know my work is being employed on the ground to affect management decisions. So I'm not the one making the decisions, but I consult, I advise, I talk with policymakers, I talk with managers, and I know that there are many, many documents where my work has helped shape on the ground decisions. So I do feel that I am an active difference maker in this line of work.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Did others from the panel have any thoughts on that as well? No? Okay. Any other questions? Someone did ask in the chat how long the materials will be available. So the materials will be available from login to the site, and the site stays up for, I'll get the exact time frame, but it will be up for quite a period of time. So they will be there as long as you have access to the ESA 2020 virtual site. Any other questions? We have a very quiet group today.
It's kind of hard to judge when to speak up because there's so many people. Hi,
okay.
I'm a master's student currently, and I have done a lot of my work in R, and I have done some mapping work in R, but I'm quite a bit less familiar with GIS. So I was just wondering, kind of to the whole panel, in your experience, how necessary is it to have that both R and GIS toolbox, or how much can you get away with just coding R skills?
I'll dive in with true confessions from being a full professor. I don't have either R skills or GIS skills. All of my students do, but I'm a professional thinker, and when I need a skill set, I either learn it myself or I collaborate with other people who have it. And so I think the take home for young professionals is to get good at what you enjoy and really enjoy wanting to be good at, and then find ways to find the additional skill sets that you need, whether it's adding to your own or whether it's via collaboration.
Right. Thanks.
I can jump in too. So this is Kathryn Cottingham. For me, I look for people who are relatively fearless and intrepid about learning new things. I actually honestly don't care if you have the skills coming in. What I care about is your willingness to learn and the kind of temperament that convinces me that I'm sure you're going to learn. So that, you know, I have undergrads this summer who jumped in 2 or 3 different languages because they knew where they wanted to go in the long run would be in different languages. And so I'm just trying to triangulate their different languages. I think as long as you can do the task at hand, oftentimes it doesn't matter what tool you use. So I think flexibility and willingness to learn is much more important than a particular toolbox in what I do. And I'm also a professor. Others may feel differently.
Thanks. That's good to know.
Samantha, or did you have any thoughts on it, or others on the group? Sorry, John, one sec.
Yeah, I mean, I do think so. I work at the National Ecological Observatory Network as a research scientist, and I will say that when we interview people for staff scientist jobs coming in, be they software developers or people who are going to do more stats or even subject matter experts, we definitely are looking for concrete skills. Like, can you jump in? Do you know how to work with big data? Do you know how to code in some form? But I think I agree with, you know, what some of the other panels have said, where we're not necessarily prescriptive about the way. You know, if you're an expert in ArcGIS, you could probably work with our mapping team and our spatial team. If you're really good at R, we have other divisions where, you know, so people who have those experiences with big data and be doing open, reproducible, traceable science in some format is really attractive, I think, for government, you know, kind of mission oriented, like agency research. But you don't have to pick your favorite platform and, like Karen said, get really good at it, be really excited and demonstrate expertise and enthusiasm in that.
Great, thank you.
There was a related question regarding, you know, languages. Is experience in programming languages other than R helpful in ecology?
Yes.
Yes. So, sounds like we have a yes on that, obviously. John, I'll let you ask your question since you had your hand up, and you can always raise your hand in here as well.
I was just going to make a comment more than a question, but
Okay.
Just being one of the elderly people on this chat here, you know, when I came up, your choice was SAS, period. And that's what I still use today because I've spent a lot of time learning how to do that. And I've got 10 more years left before I retire, so I'm not very motivated to learn R. But I will say all of my students are using R now. And some use SAS as well still. But I guess the thing is, though, time is the great leveler. And R is really hot today. But I guarantee you in 10 years, there'll be something else.
Yeah, and just to jump into, someone had mentioned other languages. I think Python is a really good one too. I know it's discipline specific, but our people who work on our big data with, but kind of our big multivariate data, like our airborne remote sensing, hyperspectral data, our microbial data at NEON, they work a lot in Python. Whereas us that are more doing ecology, biology, chemistry, we work in R. So those are kind of the 2 big ones, at least at NEON. So knowing something about coding in one of those, I think would serve you really well.
Cool. And I'm a crappy moderator. Sorry, I should have mentioned that the session's being recorded. So just in case you're fearful, it is being recorded. You can listen to it later. We also have closed captioning. So there's an option at the bottom where the menu is to turn on closed captioning if you require it. And I should also say there's now 100 of us. So I think it may be easier if you raise your hand in the feature of the raise hand, which is under the participants. You can raise your hand there or pop something into the chat because I think it'll get highly complicated now that we have lots of people. So just a quick heads up there. Thanks. Sorry.
So this is Ken. Can I jump in at this point?
Yeah, Ken, go ahead.
Okay, so I guess I wear 3 hats in the sense that I'm a teaching professor at a primarily undergraduate institution. I also conduct research mainly with students, and then I also do consulting on wetlands and rare plants and habitat assessments and things like that. In all honesty, I would have to say that any desire to learn R or or use R comes from the second of the three hats that I wear. So in other words, I find that R is mainly helpful for me in terms of doing research, and maybe even with teaching some of my students. But in terms of the actual consulting, I don't use R that much, nor do any of my colleagues who are also in consulting.
Okay, so slightly different topic. Anika Neighbors asked if, for those working in consulting and public policy, how do you deal with feelings of discouragement or worries that your decisions or work have negatively impacted the ecology you study? So often the products of research are taken out of our hands when making policy decisions. And I'm worried that my interest in public policy direct impact side will conflict with my desire for habitat conservation. So anyone want to take that from our panel?
I'm happy to talk. I'm Skylar Bear. If you didn't watch my presentation, which is fine, I'm an incoming professor at Roger Williams University, and I specifically am having a job in teaching extension work and research. I work in shellfish ecology, and I did a Knaus fellowship. I'm also millennial for people who are close to my age and have questions about what it's like being in the job market at this time. But I got to work in Congress on a bill that specifically had to deal with sea urchin conservation, and it was really hard because some of the things that I knew about the ecology and biology of that species and sea cucumbers wasn't necessarily on the table. We had to have like a lot of hard policy proof and data to show actually whether or not these species were being overfished. Finally, one piece of evidence came through from a State Department. We were actually able to take sea cucumbers out of the equation because they were so endangered for this piece of policy I got to work on. And my connections actually to that state government helped figure that out. But it was also what other folks in Congress were willing to compromise on, and they were willing to compromise on that. So that's just some of my experience. And it was really difficult to go back and forth between the science and the policy with my feelings.
That's great, thank you. Any other thoughts from the panel? So a question that's sort of related to, well, slightly related to this. So I guess there's a question around how you find good mentors. So how do you find those people, especially if your PI supervisor boss is not able to offer everything you need, which is impossible because, you know, I'm sure that you're the best mentors out there, but how do you find those? Kathy, your head nodding.
Well, I'm definitely a firm believer in having a mentoring network who can mentor you in all the different facets of your life. So having someone who reminds you of work-life balance, and someone who helps you do your writing, and someone who helps you write your proposals. How do you find those people? I'm having trouble. I noticed this pop up earlier, especially now that we're sort of all marooned in our own little islands at home. Because normally I'd say, well, you know, try to make appointments with people at ESA. So maybe the thing to do is look for people who do work that you admire and ping them through the comments in the meeting, or contact them in social media, or contact them through email. But it is still really hard to cold call someone. Right. What I want to do is punt to someone who's more extroverted than me about how do you make that first contact with a new mentor when you're shy?
Samantha, what do you think? You're on the
Yeah,
other
I
end.
think this one's tough because I talked about that in my presentation too. I think having good mentors is really crucial. And I've had both good and not very supportive mentors. And so that's why I feel that's true. But it's very hard going into it to know, you know, you sign up to be in someone's lab, do a postdoc with someone, or a master's or PhD, whatever. If they're going to be good, if they're going to really be invested in you and care about both your work and your career development and you as a person, how you're doing. Man, I think just talking to other people, trying to talk really frankly with other people that have worked with them, if you're kind of exploring a mentoring relationship, to try to do some homework. Do they have blind spots? You know, do they treat people unequally in their lab based on their gender, based on their background? That certainly happens. So I think trying to do some digging, see what people are posting on Twitter, see what kind of messaging they have about their group, about their policies on inclusivity in the lab. I think it's, especially if you're making a big commitment, like to do a PhD with someone, that person's going to be really important for your career, and like really kind of digging, not just as their science good, but how are they as a mentor. And then I do definitely agree with what Kathy said. And then you can't just rely on your supervisor, definitely having other people who does work that's aligned with yours, be weighing in and mentoring and coaching you on all the different aspects of your career.
Thanks, Samantha. We have a somewhat different question regarding government policy positions. And this may be Skylar towards you. I don't see Monica on here. I didn't see her, but the question is asking, the question is asking, for those of you in government policy positions, do you find yourself frequently working with nonprofits?
When I worked on the Hill, we worked with nonprofits all the time. And there are a lot of nonprofits that will do actually the legislative work for you sometimes. Like they have lawyers for a lot of these environmental consultant groups who understand the law, and we would work with them on the legalese, but like it's a very common thing to work with them, at least from a congressional standpoint.
Yeah, I think sort of similarly related to that was, a question from Mary asked, many of the people we have heard from on these panels are PhDs. Where do you all see positions and opportunities for people coming out of master's programs? Are there opportunities in government agencies or more limited to nonprofits? Any thoughts on that?
At Neon, for sure, we have people on our staff that have masters that are great contributors. So I think in the government, absolutely. Yep.
And I think the same could be said for consulting. Generally, when you look at environmental consulting firms, most of the people who I interact with at some of those firms are definitely at the master's level. In fact, in some cases, people are a little bit intimidated by those of us who have PhDs. We try to reduce the intimidation factor as much as possible. But generally, again, you could do much with a master's degree in consulting.
I guess one of the ideas that's floating around this whole mentoring idea is, how do you build a network? So do you have tips on good ways to build a network to find I guess the mentors or other routes into these positions?
I can answer. Well, there's lots of ways. I got involved in Twitter early on in my grad career because I was at a physically remote location for my PhD. And so reaching out to people required me going online and seeing what people were up to. And, if you know someone, you can ask if they know people who do this. You can also do a thing called an informational interview, which we did a lot in our Knaus fellowship. I mean, it's still cold calling someone, but you could be like, I just want to find out what your job is. And you'd be surprised how many people will respond to that. So those are some ideas.
Perfect. Yeah, I think there's a mix of masters, I guess master's graduates and PhD graduates. So I think a lot of the questions also stem from, where are the opportunities when, it sort of relates to the previous question, where are the opportunities for masters? So how do you navigate all this when you have a master's degree or versus a PhD? I guess, Ken, you talked a little bit about that in terms of consulting, and that might be a really good route. Where else do you see pathways for people, especially with COVID and what's going on?
All right, so you're talking about mainly with a master's degree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of like land trust type firm or land trust organizations that employ naturalists or ecologists, and I think that they would be good places to go if you have a master's degree. Trying to think what else, and as I mentioned, depending upon the nature of consulting or depending upon like engineering firms and environmental firms are also very much in masters.
That's great. Any other thoughts from the panel, or I'll move on?
I can comment. Most people in the Knaus Fellowship were master's students, and if anyone here wants to email me and I can put you in touch with one of them who now, a bunch of them work at NOAA now in particular. But if you're interested in talking to them, I'm a networking node potentially, as probably most people on this panel. So something to consider if you're listening.
That's great, Skylar. Thank you. Sort of one question that's resonating is, does the subject of your graduate research matter as much as the skills you learn along the way in terms of future research career opportunities? Personally, and this is from Sam Jolson, personally, I have been indecisive about picking graduate programs to apply to because I'm afraid of pigeonholing myself down the line. So who wants that for a question?
I'll jump in. I don't think it matters. People have long careers. Many people are switching between sectors. There are so many transferable skills that come out of a degree that if you want to be pigeonholed and you love your research area and continue to look for jobs in that, go you. But I think the dominant career pathway is that many of us will touch a bunch of different topics, and it's the skill set and knowledge that you bring that are far more important.
Kathy, you're nodding.
Yeah, I think that I typed a short answer on this. I think that same sort of openness, willingness to learn, fearlessness about trying new things that I talked about with coding earlier transfers to new subject areas, right? I have a pretty short attention span research-wise. I typically spend 5 or 10 years on a project and I move to a new one. And for me, what gets me excited are the opportunities to make a difference. So someone asked earlier about, finding ways to make a difference. I spent 10 years doing environmental health and changing how food gets made to help clean things up. And so, finding what you're interested in. And then the other thing for me that's key is finding good collaborators. And so I will often initiate new collaborations with people who I want to work with. And we will for years hatch how can we do this project together? And it incubates for a long, long time until we can finally do it. So it's sort of like finding mentors, finding good collaborators is another thing that is an alchemy, but it's wonderful when it works well.
From our millennials, what's your feeling?
I mean, I think both can be really powerful. When people are coming in to apply for jobs at Neon, we're definitely looking for both. It's like, do you have subject matter expertise in something? And it's not even necessarily in the position we want, but have you demonstrated the capability to think really deeply about something and really invest in it and become an expert? And then we could see you slightly shifting and doing that in a slightly new context. And then also, like I keep mentioning, the skills, data analysis, big data science skills, and commitment to traceability and reproducibility and open science. So I think becoming an expert in something is important, but then whether you have to stay expert in that through your whole career, I totally agree with what everyone said. You don't have to at all.
Yeah, and to jump off of that, from when I worked on Congress, they really just cared about transferable skills because a lot of people don't necessarily have a degree in what they end up working on in terms of policy there because they're expected to work on everything. So if you have demonstrated the ability to usually communicate and learn, and that for me, they're like, well, you're connected to the science world, so you already know what's going on. So we're going to look to you to figure out what we should be paying attention to for certain environmental policies, like what the scientists think. So that's, for that job, that was a important resource for them. So depending what it is, just having transferable skills and the ability to learn. But if it is like a really specific job with expertise required, that can also be great.
There's a little discussion going on sort of social media, and I'm sorry to switch the topic, and if there's, sorry, I'll let others speak. Sorry, go ahead. Any others? Okay. So there's a bit of discussion going on social media. How do, and this may be more towards the millennials, I don't know, but how do you use social media from a professional standpoint? Do you separate, your conversations in your online accounts versus, do you have 2 separate accounts, or what do you do to try to sort of maintain that balance between professional and personal?
I'll jump in. When I'm doing my job, I focus on my job, and my personal does not come into it, so that there is a firewall between interactions I have with my friends and family and interactions I have professionally. I do not use a lot of current social media. I've got a web presence, I publish, I talk to the media. I have not invested in Facebook and Twitter and some of the additional new tools. So don't feel that you have to use them. You can be perfectly successful without using every new social platform.
I will point out to individuals that I also teach in higher ed, and I have connections in there. I will point out that when reviewing faculty positions, your social media accounts are reviewed, so they are actually taken into account, both your personal and your professional. Now, not that it weighs against you, but they do look at what you're posting. So I will caution you in terms of you using those accounts, because it will stick with you. And then there's a lot of discussion going on about the fact that the history of that doesn't go away. So I will definitely make note of that so everyone understands it. What do the millennials feel about this?
I have some thoughts. But first off, I think whenever engaging with social media, you should figure out what your goals are first. About using a platform, what do you want to do with it? And my original goal for joining Twitter was I wanted to get into SciComm. I wanted to connect with science people who also cared about SciComm and to focus on that. There have been some studies done on science accounts that are most popular are people who mix some personal stuff with their science so that they post a little bit of both. It doesn't have to be really personal, but if that's your goal, is to become an online presence, that's something to consider. But for me, it's always just been about networking and posting things I care about. But that's sort of the extent of how I use that tool. I will say I was hired for my most recent position because I'm actually have know-how in science communication online, and that I have a Twitter presence. It's not that big, but I have several thousand followers. And so the department is really going to be looking to me to some extent when they have questions about that in terms of engaging with students and promoting their work on social media. So I will, at least for my hire, that was important.
All right,
Cool.
let me give the boomer response. And so as far as that goes, I actually tend to be personally active on Facebook. And very often when I go out in the field and do either wetland delineations or plant surveys, I have a person with me who often takes pictures and posts it to Facebook. Also, I'm very careful about what I post otherwise on Facebook, because I know that it would reflect on me. Also, I happen to be pretty active on LinkedIn as well. And so I know that LinkedIn is a fairly good platform that I get some business from my LinkedIn contacts.
Ken, since you were speaking, there was a question for you. Coming out of the PhD, this is from Christine Grace, coming out of PhD, focused on specific ecosystems. What is a good way of indicating to consulting firms or federal agencies that you are willing or capable of working in a variety of different ecosystems or ecological projects?
Wow. I guess that just comes either with the cover letter that you send to a prospective employer, or if and when you get an interview, you talk about the different ecosystems that you're involved in. Certainly, we can talk about different ecosystems within a general region, again, either like wetlands or uplands in a particular part of the state, or you could talk about different ecosystems from the perspective of geography, whether you're familiar with grasslands or forests or scrublands or things like that. Certainly, if you have a company that is more broad space in terms of their clients, they might find having somebody who's very broad perspective to actually be a valuable person to be employing.
Right. Thanks for that. There's a separate question which is relating to, I guess, access. If you're not a U.S. citizen and related to a lot of government jobs, is there a pathway for non-U.S. citizens to get into government, and what does that look like?
Well, I could say one thing about that. I mean, I guess I'm not 100% sure whether we have any non-citizens working at the NEON program, but some of the, like NEON is actually run for the NSF by a not-for-profit corporation called Battelle, which is actually a huge environment and defense contracting agency, by the way, which you all can check out. They are hiring scientists in all kinds of fields all the time. But technically, I work for Battelle running the NEON program. And so I have a government funded job, 100% funded, but I work for a not-for-profit corporation. So I think there might be a little more leeway there. And I would suspect that people who need visas and who aren't citizens, et cetera, can get those kinds of jobs. So more like consulting firms that run programs for the government. So that might be an intersection that international folks could look into.
Okay.
I can say that while I was at the National Science Foundation, the ability of non-citizens to serve really went down with the current administration. And so hopefully that's something that will be changed. Vote in November, please.
Vote.
Everybody should vote in November. But yeah, so there are restrictions on non-citizens right now that had not historically been there and hopefully would go away again. Skylar, you're with NOAA even now. Are you seeing that with research hires over there?
So yeah, we have a few in the Milford lab, which is super tiny. There's been a few issues mostly with the postdocs who are through the NRC program. And one just went back to France. I know the one from China was really struggling with some stupid paperwork issue. Like everyone agreed it was just a glitch, and he couldn't go to the lab for like 2 months. He couldn't step foot in it for paperwork issues. So yeah, it has not made things easier.
So Kathy, this question is probably directed to you. If you develop a manuscript that goes outside of your advisor's level of expertise on a particular topic, how do you go about finding a collaborator for publication? Do you need to find another researcher to help author the paper, or does the peer review process help iron this predicament out? I'm newer to the field.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think if it's your manuscript and you can get colleagues in your lab to kind of do a friendly review of it, there's no reason you need a collaborator. I mean, we don't look at a list of authors and decide, oh, famous person, I have to review this, right? So I'm the editor-in-chief of Ecology, and when I see a paper come in, I look at the abstract and I look at the paper. I don't look at who the authors are. So the time when it's most important to bring in expertise is when you're new in a field. We were talking about changing fields earlier. You do want to make sure that you have folks who are good in that field who can help make sure that you're tuning things in, but whether they need to be collaborators or just friendly reviewers, I think depends on how much contribution you think you need from them.
We have lots of messages streaming in. I guess this would be maybe for the boomers, but I guess others could focus on it. I guess someone's asking, is there anything you know now regarding your current job or career pathway that you wish you had known earlier? So there's the $1 million question.
All right, let me take a stab at that. So some of the projects that I work on get to be controversial. And I guess so for example, I worked on a couple of wind farm projects, and there are a lot of people out there who just simply do not like wind power, especially when it's in their backyard. And so learning how to communicate to a hostile public, and in fact, even to a public who is more green than I might be as a certified ecologist, and learning how to address their arguments, I think is something I wish I knew how to do a little bit better.
I'll weigh in. I wish I had known that imposter syndrome was a thing decades ago. It's only in the last 5-8 years that I've had a label to put on that feeling of always being incompetent, especially coming out of my degree that the first time, that the early career stages where you don't know how good you are, you don't know how other people are going to respond to what you can bring to the table, and having a label for that and knowing that that's a normal feeling, I think is really useful. The other thing I would say is I had no idea how fun and fascinating being a scientist could be. And just that ability to move into new projects and find new collaborators and learn new stuff constantly, and just always sharpening my brain has been just so immensely satisfying as a career. And I did not know that was lying in wait for me when I took the initial steps into the field.
I guess the follow-on to this, how do you deal with imposter syndrome?
You find mentors, you find friends, you have people that can pick you up when discouragement happens, and you just keep going, right? And this is not unique to science. If you read sports biographies or business biographies or any musicians, it's all about putting the hours in and keeping up the practice and building those communities and just keeping going in the face of disappointment. So I think that's the other thing, is what we do is hard, right? And so accepting that and saying, I'm going to do it anyway because, wow, if I do, that's really meaningful. You know, I don't know a better way to be a human, really.
I could give just, I know we're out of time, but one really concrete piece of advice for people who are earlier in their career and just jumping in is it's really important your first salary. No one told me how important it was to negotiate when I finally got a job offer, because it's really stressful. You're a postdoc, you know, or you're just coming out and you apply for so many jobs, and then you finally get an offer and you're like, yes. And you're so excited, and it's such a big jump from what you were paid before that you think, oh my God, this is incredible. But then it's really hard to move. You know, that starting salary, you tend to get incremental raises until you jump to, you know, whole new levels on the career ladder. So I didn't negotiate at all on my salary coming in, and people don't talk about salary, and man, it's really tough. So negotiate, know that you're worth a lot. Don't take the first offer, even if you think it's a lot. Ask for more, like talk to friends, and don't undersell yourself with your starting job with your salary. So there you go.
That's great advice, Samantha. Well, I think we are out of time, and hopefully, you know, others can email you with questions, and I think you all said you're available if they have queries. But thank you for all your time in answering the questions. And the chat will be available. This was recorded and will be available online, so someone can look at it later if they want to follow up on any of the answers that were there. Thank you, everyone, and wish you all the best the rest of the conference.